Okay. Hello, everyone. So for today, we're going to do a little bit of a review first of what we learned last week, and then we're going to start off with the next set of topics. Before I begin, we talked a lot about culture last week, and I want to share with you a culture that I found very interesting. So I'm just going to read it out loud. Everyone knows the martyrs of Libya. You've all heard of them, right? So this is a story based on their actual village where they came from. It was told by Father Antonios Fahmy of Alexandria, Egypt, and he went to that village and he was attending a liturgy there. So it says, let me tell you about an actual incident that happened on the Feast of Nayrouz. We went to Al-Ur village in Semalut in Upper Egypt, where the martyrs of Libya used to live. We went looking for an answer to a question we had on our minds since the day we saw the martyrs' courage and strength in the video of their execution. How was their faith so strong to withstand execution? We arrived at El-Ur village at 6:30 a.m. and immediately made our way to the church to attend the Holy Liturgy. Surprisingly, we found 600 children already in the church, 600 children that came from El-Ur and 3 other surrounding villages to attend a Friday, not a feast liturgy. We stood quietly among them. The girls were covering their heads and the boys were standing reverently. During the reciting of the Orthodox Creed, all the children raised their hands in the air and started reciting the Orthodox Creed in one strong voice that really moved us and made it feel as if the church walls were shaking. 600 children from the ages of 1 all the way to ages of 15 years old in one voice. At that moment, we all subconsciously reached out to our phones and started recording that unbelievable moment. Beside me was standing a lady from the family of Girgis Miled, the martyr, with her hungry little girl crying. The mother turned towards me and said she cannot eat. She is a big girl. She is 2 years old and will be partaking of Holy Communion. As we were all preparing to go for the Holy Communion, the priest came out and announced, today it is year 4 and 5's turn to partake of the Holy Communion. We did not understand, but we saw year 4 and 5 children going to partake of the Holy Communion while the rest of the 600 children strongly recited the distribution hymns, followed by a veneration hymn to the martyrs of Libya. When the Holy Liturgy finished, we asked why all the children didn't partake of the Holy Communion. They answered, we normally come to the church fasting and we attend the liturgy, but because the altar is so small, we only partake of the communion when it's our turn. We were shocked to hear that 600 children wake up that early on their only day off school, arrive before Abuna at the church and fasting to attend the Holy Liturgy, not sure whose turn it would be to partake of the communion. We learned that it was the same for the rest of the weekdays. During the Great Lent, they go fasting, whether they would partake of the Holy Communion or not, to attend the Holy Liturgy after school. A lady would make her 2-year-old daughter fast, hundreds of children coming from 4 different villages to attend a Friday liturgy, reciting the Orthodox Creed in one voice with raised hands. I definitely found an answer to my question. If this was how the martyrs of Libya were raised, it was no surprise that they persevered the execution. They were raised in an Orthodox spiritual life in El-Ur village, hence they lived the Orthodox faith. So the reason why I want to talk about that, when we talk about the culture and how it's built throughout, where you're being raised, that family that is happening, it really was very powerful and moving when you hear, you see these martyrs of Libya, they were not fazed at all when, an execution, a quite literal thing that we thought was beyond us or past us, they had no problems. But then you see the village that they came from and it was ingrained into them, kind of like we were talking about culture, right? It's from a young age, it's growing in them. So I found this very moving because I think yesterday or last week we talked a lot about the culture and how it can negatively affect us. And this is one of the positive ways when we see that kingdom culture affecting these villagers, and we see the results of it at the end. So the agenda for today, we're just going to recap last class. And we're going to discuss spirituality within the context of the postmodernism, discuss selfism, and then discuss youth culture and what influences and shapes it, and what we can expect from the culture. And then we're going to go into the laws of communication. And we're just going to go through a few of them and how we can apply these concepts to the youth mission. So as we talked about yesterday, or last week, so I keep saying yesterday, when we talk about the culture, can anyone just kind of explain this this little circle graph a little bit for us, just what it means? What was the outer ones, the symbols and behaviors, how important were they versus the inner ones when we talk about worldview, or when we were talking about the actual beliefs or values? What was the big difference between them? Do you remember? So if we remember, we were talking about how the symbols and behaviors, they were very superficial, and they can be changed without necessarily changing the actual beliefs or values, or the values might stay the same, whereas the outward symbols and behaviors could change, and vice versa. Whereas when we talked about, if you're changing someone's worldview or belief, that is much more concrete. It takes a lot more effort to make that change, and when it's there, you have to work really hard on affecting it. And then when we talk about how do we challenge the different cultures, what did we say was the best way if we want to really challenge a culture? What was the best way to do it? I need some feedback, guys, please. Listening to the other people's opinions, that's very good. What else did we talk about? Like when we're talking about these different ways, was it a good way to try to change their symbols? We gave an example. Do you guys remember what the example was? There was someone in the Old Testament that tried to change basically this people's worldview, but he was very unsuccessful. And he tried basically by just changing people's symbols. Remember we had mentioned that? We're talking about King Nebuchadnezzar and the three youths, how he was trying to change their names. He was trying to change a lot of the outward behavior, but not necessarily anything from their worldviews or beliefs, and that's why they weren't changed, or they weren't transformed to what he was hoping to get. And then we talked about the kingdom culture, the church culture, the Christian culture, and the world culture. And I really want to just focus on this a little bit because this is very crucial for us to understand. When we talked about kingdom culture, can that change whatsoever? No. We all agree, kingdom culture cannot change. This is what Jesus himself has passed down. But what can change is the church culture, Christian culture. And what could be an example of the differences in church culture between the different churches? What would be an example of how they vary or how they differ? Yes. So how fasting can be different in different churches. Yes. Anyone just something else? Exactly. Perfect. The way we pray the liturgy, right? If I go to a Greek Orthodox church versus a Coptic Orthodox church, it's going to be very different, but the actual sacrament might still be very much the same, right? And when we talk about Christian culture, what's so special about Christian culture, or how is that different from church culture? Remember this a little bit more? So we mentioned how Christian culture, that could be basically something that's very broad or vague. It doesn't necessarily require a sacrament like a liturgy, right? So it's, I'm helping the poor, right? That's something just that we can do as a Christian culture, and maybe how I'm trying to help can be affected by the world culture, right? And remember how we mentioned the world culture, or whatever culture is around in that time, that can cause changes, and we have to make sure, we have to be very wary that the world culture doesn't try to infiltrate the kingdom culture, right? And we've seen in the video that I had showed with that pastor trying to talk about Jesus, right? He was trying to fit the narrative of, bigotry into what happened with Jesus and the woman that he calls, that she was asking for his help, right? So we have to be very careful, especially when it comes to that kingdom culture, that it cannot be affected. Then we talk about pre-modernism, modernism, and postmodernism, and we're going to get into the things that come from postmodernism. So this is kind of what we were going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about secularism, spirituality, and selfism, and just how it's affecting the youth. Because again, it's all good to know this stuff, but it's how is it actually affecting them? What is happening to them? So, and we did discuss this, the different ways postmodern influence came. If you remember, we even talked about how psychology has changed when we were talking about, say, homosexuality. In the past, it might have been I was born this way, and now it's I feel this way, right? So even the psychology has changed in how you view a mental illness or whatever it is, right? So the language, the religion, even the religion, we talk about postmodernism. Remember, we talk premodernism, it's God is the absolute truth. Then modernism, it's humans understand the truth, or human bring forth the truth. And then afterwards in postmodernism, it's everyone's truth is subjective, just like the religion. So no one religion is right, no one religion is wrong. It's whatever subjective feeling that you have towards your own personal beliefs. So now we're going to get into what happens from postmodernism. So the first thing is secularism, right? And the resulting beliefs that come from secularism is existentialism, humanism, and relativism. So what is secularism? Let's try to just define that first. Does anyone know what that means? Or any just random guess at what it can mean? Very good. So it can be defined as everything that excludes God and the truth, or and his truth. So basically it's, let's take God out of the picture, and it's whatever I believe in. So remember when we were talking about postmodernism, we're saying it's all subjective. So when we're talking about secular, it's let's remove God out of this picture. Let's remove God's truth out of this picture, right? So now that God's truth, or that absolute truth, is gone, it's everyone can have their own personal truth, because what makes my truth more valuable than your truth? What makes my truth right and your truth wrong, right? So from this, we start seeing, again, that existentialism, the humanism, and relativism. I'm gonna have to switch slide decks for a second, sorry. We didn't get a chance to actually go through all of it before. When we talk about existentialism, so we're defining our purpose in life. So a lot of people have these existential crises, and you hear that with the youth sometimes. It's what's going on with my life. Why do we think that youth might start having this like revelation? We'll say it's like, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? Why would that happen to them, especially when they're going in through high school and university? What happens at that stage? Yeah. They're open to a bigger world. They're being bombarded by this different thought processes. And remember, when we're taking out God out of the equation, truth, because we know that the absolute truth tells us what we are to God. We are his children, right? We have some kind of purpose in life, right? To be with God. But when we take it again, God out of it, it's now I'm being told by one person that, oh, it's to make lots of money. One person's telling me it's to be happy. One person is to do this. One person is to do that. So now I'm bombarded by all this, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my life? What is my purpose? And unfortunately, this results in that individuality and freedom, or we'll put in quotation marks, freedom, because it's not actually freeing. If anything, it causes more, and as we've seen, an increase in psychiatric disorders, because unfortunately, a lot of these youth now, they become more troubled, because again, there's no absolute truth. And this is the scariest part about the world that we're living in today. It's our children, our youth are being told constantly that there is no truth. There is no absolute truth. And this is where we really need to step in when it comes to how we can try to inform them of this, that there is an absolute truth. And I know the book that I think everyone's given, the Timeless Truth, Timeless Truth and Truthless Times, it really helps us out a lot. And apologetics start to really become important at this point in time, because they're looking for answers. A lot of the youth right now, they want to know why. And obviously where existentialism, it's like we were saying, it's defining that purpose in life. When you're trying to find it without a truth and you're making your own truth, you get to run free with whatever you want. You act independently. There's no one telling you what to do. And that's, again, can be very scary, because that can lead to a lot of permanent damage. And unfortunately, we see that with youth where, and this is something I think we really need to let youth know, it's you're never a lost cause. There's never a point of no return, because I think what happens in a lot of situations is they're searching for their own personal truth. They feel they've made a mistake that's too big of a mistake, right? And when they feel that this it's too big of a mistake, how am I gonna face my maker? How am I gonna face my creator? How am I gonna come back to church? Right? And this is real, because I have seen this in a lot of youth where it's, well, since I'm already gone, khalas, what's the point of me trying to come back? I'm not gonna be accepted anyways, right? And so then they just almost double down in what they've been doing, and then it's further and further away from Christ. Yes.
I have a question. Like, if they are thinking there's no truth, why they think that they can't be accepted? Like, I think they are different ideologies. Like, one is not truth, and the other is I did something massively wrong. I will not be accepted.
So you're right about that. I think it's end of the day, there is an absolute truth. We have to know that. Just because you're being told something day in and day out, you might fall for it, right? People might fall for that. Youth might fall for that. Oh, I'm seeing all these people around me and I'm liking this idea. And they're thinking that by doing this, I'm going to get purpose in life, or I'm going to find my own personal purpose. What happens is when they don't find the purpose, when they've hit that rock bottom, right? What happens? They want to turn back to something that is absolute, some kind of steady rock. And we know the church is that rock. So it's like there's almost a part of them that's saying, I want to come back, but then there's almost a fear. How am I going to come back? What am I going to do? How will I come back? And that's very difficult for a lot of people. And it's unfortunate, because I think those that do find their way back can be excellent resources to the church because they've gone through it, right? I always think of a lot of the saints, the great saints like Saint Moses, right? He was so far gone. His absolute truth was, I am powerful. I am strong, right? And I'll never forget the one thing that happened where Saint Moses, he was trying to, I think it was, kill some livestock for this farmer. And what happened was a dog started barking at him. So it alerted him and he had to run away. His personal truth, and it was very twisted, it's how dare this dog not allow me to take these animals. Therefore, to justify it, I'm going to go and kill that entire family and that household and everyone around it. That was his own personal truth. And that same person later on, he's saying, I cannot, because he has found the real truth, the absolute truth that is God. When he is now Saint Moses, he's saying, don't even have negative feelings towards your neighbors. It's such a difference in how their personality is, but it's the same person, and he's found the truth, not a truth. Well, do you have anything else you may want to?
No, I was just thinking from the very beginning when you were saying this, that in secularism they replace a meta-narrative. Meta-narrative is this overarching story that governs everything under it. So the meta-narrative before modernism was religious, at least in the West. So the meta-narrative helped people interpret everything from a religious perspective. People who started not to believe in God, whether it be because of their own deviation or interaction with the church in Europe, and so on, they replaced the meta-narrative with another one. There's always a meta-narrative. The current meta-narrative is the postmodern, which is not theistic, is not God related, but it is God, small g related, which is humanism, which I think we'll speak about. It's a replacement of meta-narrative. There's always something that guides what you do. Even when people say, no, I'm not guided by anything, they're guided by the fact that they're not guided by anything. So it's that replacement of the mega story or the meta story or this meta narrative that is different, and that's what the youth need to understand, Because if you think, oh, you know what, it makes sense to replace the absolute truth of religion, because who knows, maybe it's not true. Well, yeah, but you're replacing it with something else. What tells you that that something else is true? That's even before we come into the truth and speak about, the theology, God, and so on. Because the secularism says, well, God is man-made. We made up God. We made up this, and that's
Right.
the meta-narrative of the divine meta-narrative, or the divine or the theistic meta-narrative. But the argument doesn't hold.
Yeah, I can relate to that from even just the discussion. Like, I think the biggest problem is even with not when it's not just big church,
Mhm.
it's the logic and thinking
Mhm.
just doesn't exist anymore. Like self-contradicting messages have become very common,
Mhm.
right? It's like in every aspect of life. So we take young kids who don't get, to your point, two different messages
Hmm.
at the same time. Whatever the last message they hear is the one that sticks with them. Then next morning they hear something else because they lack I think because there is too much information coming in,
Mhm.
they don't have time to even comprehend anything or analyze anything. So whatever comes last sticks. And
And whatever stays longer.
yeah,
So, in my opinion, what is currently the meta-narrative is humanism. That is the main meta-narrative. Like when I saw in the previous slide, like you had existentialism, humanism, and relativism, and they are secular, out of secularism. But I would always put humanism on top. Meaning that's the source, that's the problem.
Mhm.
It's either humanism or theism.
And if you remember what we were talking about last week with the postmodernism contradiction, where it's everything is relative, so there's no absolute truth, but that in itself is a contradiction because the only thing that is true is that everything is not true, right? So it's even in that there's a contradiction.
And postmodernists, they don't even care about the truth. Like the truth is not.
It's
not-
irrelative.
So there's something beyond whether the truth is relative or absolute. The question in postmodernism or the statement is, who cares? Why should I care about the truth? And they just circumvent the whole search for the truth. There is no search for the truth in absolute postmodernism. There is no search for it. There's no need. And this is where agnosticism comes in. Because I don't know, and I don't think I need to know. It doesn't matter. And you hear that from a lot of people. Like, I don't know if God exists, and it's okay.
Mhm.
Like I'm okay. Fine. But I don't necessarily know. And here's the next piece. I don't think I will ever know.
Sounds like pre-Christianity kind of thing, the Roman Empire, where they just want to enjoy their life.
Hedonism.
Hedonism.
It's very similar, like.
Yeah. And this is existentialism.
Yeah.
We eat and drink, and next day we die. That's the purpose of life.
Mm.
And I think existentialism is not, or existential principles are not bad. It's just if you take them to the ism, they become bad. Like find out what is my purpose in life, for example, when you say, well, why am I here? We even preach about this. You say, on your ripstone,
Yeah.
you'll have your date of birth dash your date of death. Your life is the dash. What did you do in the dash? Right? But obviously the ism is where we can run into some trouble.
Mhm. And then we get to the second part of secularism that Bruno was mentioning, the humanism, where you're focusing on human reason to make the decision. So again, we've taken out truth. We don't care about truth at this point. And now we're saying that the human is going to make the decision, and it's whatever is right for the individual and society, right? Now, this is where we have to be very careful. And as Amuna mentioned, and I can definitely agree with you on that, where it's a lot of what we're going through now is a lot more about humanism. When we think of the being politically correct, I don't want to upset anyone, right? It's first I have to make sure I'm okay, but the person in front of me or society, I'm not upsetting anyone around me, right? And so regardless of the truth, it could be this is an absolute truth, but if that person feels that I upset them or I offended them, I have to be very careful. And it makes our jobs and just everything that we're doing a lot more difficult. Funny enough, I was talking to a friend of mine who was doing a residency in the hospital, and I guess he was dealing with a transgender person. And so the person's name was Luke. And so as he's talking and giving the report for this patient, he says, he is blah, 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 blah. And right away they stopped him and it's like, no, we don't say that. It's a they. That's how they're to be referred as. And then he even saw the other doctor who was working the actual attending do the same issue, but then it's right away he had to correct him. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry, they, them. Like right away, because again, it's that humanism has really taken control of our society to the point where, again, truth is irrelevant. It's about what am I doing for myself and for society. And we're trying to, and this is the funny thing, because it's talking about trying to build a more humane society where everyone is accepted, everyone's, loved by all. But by doing this, we've also created a lot of hate for people who are not following this humanistic value, we can say. And again, this is where we get very worried about ourselves in our day-to-day jobs, because it's like, it's almost as if, can I say my own personal beliefs? Can I say what I feel is true? Because if I say something that's contradicting the humanism values that society is having right now, I may be ostracized, I may be pushed away. And again, this is a struggle that a lot of the youth face right now because they're living it so much worse than we are. Unfortunately, schools are a lot more, we'll say, humanistic. Universities are a lot more humanistic. Work, at least if say you own your own business, you can kind of get away with doing things the way you want, to an extent, right? Depending on, I'm gonna go to work, I'm gonna leave, I'm not gonna communicate with a lot of people, just put my head down, get to work and leave. You can almost get away with it to an extent. But school, it's in your face. University, it's in your face. And for the most part, there are a lot of jobs where it's in your face. You don't have a choice. So it's, how do we deal with that? And this could be a nice little discussion question for all of us. So if you are, again, in university right now and you're facing something, just to put yourselves in that child or the youth's shoes, how are you going to deal with, trying to make sure that you can get your point across without, feeling ostracized? How am I going to be able to do this? And we kind of talked a little bit about it last week, when we're talking about addressing someone else, right? But how are we going to do it now if I'm just trying to live my life and I don't want to bother anyone, but I also don't want to, again, be ostracized? What do I do? How would I, if I'm coming to you for advice, what would you tell me?
If I speak, I have this situation company.
Yeah.
This is come to my house pretty much weekly basis. And I don't know whether it's the right thing or not to say to is I always tell them you can express your opinion. You don't need to be offensive to anybody. So for example, this funny is yesterday my daughter was saying she counted how many kids in her grade 11 class that actually are change their sexuality. 10 out of 22 kids
Oh my gosh.
in one class, right? And
Oh my
she was
gosh.
telling me the story and saying, she's made a couple of comments that basically we do nothing to get her into trouble, right? So my position is you're not in school to defend any position or to criticize anyone. You're in school, you don't need to associate with these people, but you don't need to make any deal, right? So what you do is you can say in the way I grew up, in my culture, in my church, we don't really have that, but you have your own views. It's up to you. It doesn't line up with my culture. So I think my advice is to get this, don't be afraid of having, like, expressing your opinion, just like everybody else. Like, if somebody has the guts to say, I was born as a man, but I can change myself into a woman,
Mhm.
you should have the guts to say, you know, that doesn't really work in my church.
Yeah.
It's like, what's wrong with it? Like, just, you don't need to be offensive in saying that. You just
Mhm.
express your opinion. Like, that's
Mhm.
that's really the extent of what we can do today, I think.
So I really like that actually, and I like the way you said it. I wish if you could repeat it again. It's like based on my culture, like this is not something that we believe in or something. I really like how you worded that because to me, again, I'm not. If I was to say that to someone, I don't think I'd be offending them. And I don't know. You guys maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I did like how you worded that. I think it still gets the point across without trying to be offensive. The unfortunate thing, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate. Someone might still say that's offending, and it's something that again may happen, right? Where it's like I feel offended that you don't agree with me.
I'm so sorry you offended, but you know, what can I do? Like, you know, I feel offended in this music too. Like,
Yeah.
this is where I think this is the part that where the political correctness is taking over every conversation.
Mhm.
What's wrong with saying, yeah, I'm so sorry I offended you, I didn't really need to,
Mhm.
but if you think disagreeing with you is an offense, why does it go both ways?
Mhm.
Most people, I think the problem with most people today is they're afraid to say that.
Mhm.
And if you say it again politely,
Mhm.
you're not picking a fight. You're just saying, you know what you just said goes both ways, right? So, in short, I think what we need to teach kids is how to think logically about what you're hearing
Mhm.
and answer accordingly. Like the self-defeating situations
Yes.
are very common now,
Yeah.
right? So honestly, like I don't teach high like
Mhm.
Sunday school.
Yeah.
I used to many years ago. I never done it the last 2 years.
Mhm.
But with my own kids, that's what I practice. Big on the word, like people would say very big sentences.
Mhm.
You know, but at the end of the day, there are 3 or 4 key words in every big, you know, speech.
Yeah.
You pick those 3, 4 words, prepare your answer to them in a logical way. Show where it's self-defeating. Pick where you can actually take what this person says to your own benefit,
Mhm.
and you will be able to get away with that type of conversation. Even at work, I like like forget the the church point of view, or the let's call it the your own beliefs. Like even like with actual work related discussions, people will make very big speeches that basically defeat itself.
Mhm.
So just if you learn to pick how to, if you learn how to pick the contradicting words,
Mhm.
I think it drives the conversation very. You can drive your point home very politely without getting into unnecessary argument.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. One of the issues, as you mentioned, the self-defeating conversations. They just want to find a way to put you down in one way or another. It's going to be more common, and it's going to be affecting again our youth. And as you mentioned, I think it's very important that we can have our youth comfortable with expressing themselves. And I think that's very important because it does happen. And like you said, why can't it be both ways? Where if they're already trying to say, and if you remember humanism, it's what's right for both the individual and society, right? So there is that individual belief as well that you're trying to do what's right for you. So it's important that we can actually make them feel empowered, and that's the word I really want to get to, empowered, that they can say their own thoughts. They shouldn't be scared to say their own thoughts as long as it's done in the right manner, in the way that expresses using even their own language. And I'm talking about own language, the world language, right? So if they're doing contradictions and whatnot, as you mentioned, it's like, let's pick it out and let's logically use this. Let's use it. This is their logic. This is the world logic. Let's show them how, I can use this as well. And this is how I'm going to get my point across. I think that's very important for us to understand when we're talking to the youth. We really do need to empower them, especially when it comes to this, because there are some entry points, I'll say, entry points where we can still express ourselves in a nice, respectful way. I had this one colleague at work. She's also Coptic Orthodox. And I was very proud of her. So during Gay Pride Month, they had the pins at work and whatnot. Everyone wants to wear it, whatever. And the way she responded was actually very similar to kind of how you expressed it, where it's like, in my culture, this isn't something we believe in, right? And just, she said, in my culture, she used specific words that it's like, you have to respect my culture, right? Just like how I respect your culture. I don't agree with this. You do you want to put on the pin by all means, but I'm not going to do this, right? And I think it's very important, again, the wording of how we say things, especially now. And then out of secularism, relativism is that last point of these three. Again, it's all relative. And this say that based on the society, what is deemed good could be the exact opposite to another society or culture. And that's important because, again, we can see this in the world right now. If we go to an Islamic country, what they think is right is going to be different from a Western country, what they think is right. Even within the Western cultures, you can see based on states or whatever, what they see as right is different from what another state might see as right. What a province might see as right is what's different from a different province. And this is all kind of going back to the whole secularism, right? Truths and moral values are not absolute. No one views better than the other. The primacy of de facto values. So when we talk about that, and we're taking these three philosophical beliefs, we get an irrational and impersonal universe. So the individual defines everything, right? That's what we're getting from existentialism. The man or person, they're the ones that are defining everything. Then we're talking about humanism. Man has freedom, responsibility, and capability of making the right choice. So, and then finally with relativism, we're seeing that truth and moral values are not absolute, but relative to the person or groups holding them. And from these, we get kind of the beliefs or the values of secularism. And from the beliefs or values, we see that reason, tolerance, and sincerity, kind of like what we've been talking about this whole time. We're seeing a lot of, and we could say either reason is more important than what you're saying. So it's like, why are you saying what you're saying is more important than what it is that you're saying. And I always remember, I thought this was very funny at work because I do a lot of HR in my job. And it's a lot of times one person can say the exact same thing another person says, but very different responses, right? Very different responses. And it's like, why? The tone was off. That tone was very triggering. That tone said this, or the way they said it this way, or this one additional word or syllable that they added made it sound like they were attacking me, right? And so it's having to find that right way of saying things. And that's one of the values of secularism. It's what is the reason behind what you're doing. And then the tolerance, and tolerance, we're going back to that lack of truth. I remember how we've been saying with secularism, truth is irrelevant. So if now we're talking about tolerance, tolerance is more important than the truth. Whether or not you are wrong or right, I need to be tolerant to you. That is what one of secularism's values are. It's showing that I need to be tolerant. And if I can show you that I'm tolerant, it doesn't matter if I'm wrong, doesn't matter if I'm right, but I'm tolerant towards you. I can get away with it. And this gets very frustrating because I think our understanding of tolerance is very different than the worldly understanding of tolerance, right? When we talk about tolerance, again, we love people who sin, or we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. We have to be very clear about that, right? Does that mean that you're not allowed to come near me? It's like, no, I can still talk with you. I can still, address you. I'm not going to belittle you, right? All those technically are forms of tolerance according to the world. But for them, they take it one step further, where it's, if you are talking to us, that means you agree with us. It's like, no, 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 let's take it a step back. Just because I can speak with you, just because I show you respect, because this is what Jesus has taught us. He never once said, get away from me, you prostitute. He never once said that. He never said, get away from me, you sinner. He welcomed the sinners, but he transformed them. And this is the same kind of idea. We've always been loving. That doesn't mean we've been necessarily tolerant of the sin or the behavior, but we've been loving constantly, and that will never change about our values as a church. And so we have to be very careful when people are saying you're not being tolerant. It's what is your definition of tolerance? Almost, you have to ask, like, what do you expect me to do to be tolerant? Because yes, I'll employ you or whatever. Or yes, I believe that you have the right to live. That doesn't mean that you have the that you should be living this kind of way. And then finally, when we talk about sincerity, sincerity is more important than substance, going back to secularism. When I say sincerity is more important than substance, so again, it doesn't matter what you're aiming for, as long as you're sincere about it, then it's okay. And this kind of goes back to it's all relative, right? If I'm very sincere in my message, even if my message is terrible, but I'm very sincere about it, so like there's values towards what he's saying, there's value in what he's saying. Again, it could be completely out of left field, and I might be overstretching it, but when you think of someone like Hitler, he was very sincere in his message. You know, his message was terrible, but he was very sincere. He was able to captivate a lot of people because of it. Right? It's the same kind of things that we're seeing now. I see a lot of posts from political leaders that are very sincere sounding, we'll say. And it's because they're sincere, regardless if it's right or wrong, but it's sincere, so he has a good message. Doesn't matter the substance that's in that message. Doesn't matter what's being said, but it's sincere. It's very from the heart. So because it's from the heart, there's value to it. And then when we get from values, we get to the behavior, so situational ethics. Remember how I said a lot of what we believe in, or a lot of what the world believes in today, it's based on the situation. So before, we had a common understanding that abortion was wrong. We should not be doing it. Now it comes to a situation. Well, what if this person had this and this happen to them? What if, but now it's almost, the ethics change based on the situation. So again, it's removing that absolute truth. Because how is it that if a truth is a truth, it shouldn't be changing no matter what the situation is, right? And we can always go back to Christ. And I always like going back to Christ because that's who our source of truth is, right? Christ never once said, you know, well, oh, you had a very rough life, so you needed to steal. Therefore, it's okay. You can continue stealing. No, he never said that. He said, you know, let's make sure you get the help, the support you need, right? But at the same time, I cannot say that, oh, it's okay to keep stealing because you're very poor. No, it was never that. He will go out of his way and heal that person, allow them to be able to, you know, get up, take up their bed and walk and provide for themselves. But there was no situation where that truth got warped or the ethics changed. When it comes to secularism, there's also that changeable commitment. So before, if you agree with one thing, it's stuck. If you got married, it's stuck. It's no longer the case. I'm sure you all hear of the statistics. 1 in 2 people, 1 in 2 marriages end up in divorce, right? Why is that? Because now it's a changeable commitment. It's just because I got married, it doesn't mean that I'm stuck with you. That's what the world is kind of saying. And because of this, it's unfortunate because that actually affects more people, because since now this commitment is changeable, is it really even a commitment anymore? And I get very concerned about this because some of these commitments that we make, they're sacramental. They are things that have the Holy Spirit intertwined in it. And for us to break it off, we're basically saying the Holy Spirit's power is not as strong as we would think. And that really concerns me because of where, you know, people are heading. We see this also, and we'll use, say, the Anglican Church as an example. The Anglican Church was a part of the Catholic Church. Does anyone know why the Anglican Church separated? So Anglican is like basically a form of Catholicism, but basically King Henry wanted to get a divorce from his wife. He was not allowed. So he said, okay, I am now going to be the head of the church, and created Anglicanism. So it's, if you actually look at it, a lot of the values, we'll say, are very similar to the Catholic Church. But then it's like, but divorce is completely okay because it's a changeable commitment. And then obviously other things happened afterwards as it continued to progress. But it's, again, that changeable commitment makes it very difficult for us to say, you know, you have to do this. And it even spills out in a lot of other things. Something I always find very interesting, I have a few different types of staff. I have staff that have been working for 30 plus years in the business and staff that have been working for 5 years. And you see there's a very big difference in their commitment levels. The commitment level of someone who's been here for 30, I don't care if I'm sick, I don't care, I'm still coming into work. And then you have the person who has been only working for 5 years, it's, I have a cough, I need to stay home, right? There's a very big difference where that loyalty or that commitment level comes from. And a part of it is, again, that world of secularism, where it's secularism, you're removing the truth and it's what is important to me. What is my truth? So if I believe I'm sick and I believe that it's gonna be affecting me so dearly, I cannot stay home. I mean, I cannot go to work, I have to stay home. Whereas maybe people that have been working for 30 plus years, they're saying, if I stay home, I am going back on my commitment to people, to my fellow coworkers. Now my fellow coworkers are going to be stuck with more work. I don't want to do that because I am committed to the job that I agreed to. And so I always find that very interesting how it's even spilled into smaller aspects of commitment, not necessarily just the big acts of commitment. And then personal morality. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about, where relativism, where it's all relative. Same thing with personal morality. So things that were once morally wrong are now not as obviously wrong. The culture has allowed us to choose what is right and wrong. So when it comes to sexuality, there's no wrong. It's all okay as long as you're happy. So again, back in the days, there was very clear cut, this is an abomination. Now it's, well, no, it's love is love. It's like, where did this come from? Again, we take out God, we take out the truth, we get this. Now I'm just going to switch one more time. So that was basically the first part, secularism. Sorry, I'm just going to open this up. So now we're going to get to spirituality, right? One other thing I do want to mention when we look at this, secularism, it's a loss of truth leading to a loss of hope. And just a nice little message you always see that Jesus says, I am the truth, right? So that's Jesus's answer to secularism. He says, I am the truth. Now we're going to get to spirituality. So our understanding of God, and we're going to go through that now. So spirituality is a response from modernism coming from there is no God. So remember how in modernism, they took God out of the equation completely. It's all about man's truth. So when they found there were, we'll say, contradictions in modernism, they realized that they needed God. Kind of as Abuna said, there's a lowercase g, not a capital G, but a lowercase g. So spirituality kind of allows people hope when things don't always make sense. They're spiritual, right? And so it has that postmodern twist where it's still not an absolute because it's that lowercase g, but it's everyone can have their own personal gods, their own personal spirituality that makes them feel happy, or makes them feel better. And I think what's very interesting about spirituality in the postmodern era, it's still very selfish. It's, why am I spiritual? To make me happy. We know as Christians, being spiritual is not about being happy. We see a lot of people struggle in their spirituality and in their growth, right? But it's not necessary to make them happy. A result of being spiritual might be being peaceful, but that doesn't mean that they're going to have a very easy life. So from there we get agnosticism, pantheism, and mysticism. So there is a weak agnosticism and a strong agnosticism. when he talks about strong agnosticism, sorry, I have a little bit of a stuffy nose, guys, so bear with me if you can't understand me too well. But it's a belief that it's impossible to know whether or not God exists. So strong agnosticism, they're saying for sure you will never understand God. Absolutely not. Whereas weak agnosticism is more of what's seen today, where they claim they just don't know whether or not God exists. But it's like, who knows? Well, like, does it really matter? Or as Abuna had said, it's like, do they even care about it? Right? This is seen a lot more today. And I'll tell you from a youth I remember, they were very much a weak agnostic. Again, Coptic Christian, was raised in a very strict household. And then they got a little bit of freedom. They got a taste of freedom, traveled overseas for schooling. And it's not like they want to even argue that God doesn't exist. They're just like, whether or not God exists, it is what it is. Does it really affect me? I don't know. I just want to live my life. And weak agnosticism is very difficult because, as you know, that verse, it's like, I'd rather you be hot or cold. We don't want lukewarm, right? And that's the struggle that we face today with the agnostics in the world. It's very much lukewarm. It's, I don't want to have an argument with you. I don't want to have a discussion about God. It's just, I want to live my life. And these people, we have to figure out a way of how do we approach them. So in your own thoughts, if again you have someone, a youth who is somewhat agnostic like that, a weak agnostic, how would you deal with it? How do you try to approach them to at least get them interested in an idea that there might be a God or something like that? What can we do there? Pray for them, absolutely. That's one of the best things you can do. Absolutely. Pray for them, pray for them, pray for them. What else can we do? So we know Pope Kyrillos, man of prayers and miracles. Can we say that all Pope Kyrillos did was prayers and prayers alone, or did he do something when he was in his papacy? What did he do? Did he give any great sermons that really moved people and got them coming? No, he wasn't a sermon giver. But actions. With agnosticism, sometimes, especially weak agnosticism, part of the reason why they become a weak agnostic is because that's all they've seen around them. So when you see someone who is very powerful in their faith, powerful in their belief, that gets them curious. That can make them at least want to know, why are you the way you are? Right? If I see someone who is constantly happy, right, and always doing this, I may not need to, like, he may not tell me, oh, I'm so happy, Kirill, tell him, like, you should join me. But I might come to him and say, what are you doing differently that's making you so much more happier than I, right? And this is kind of where we can try to help affect these weak agnostics. It's, let's also, absolutely, prayer will always be the first thing, and it has to be sincere, our prayer for them. Second thing is our actions. Let's show our love, let's show our spirituality, let's show our God to them, and hope that maybe with prayer, that they might ask that question, why? Why are you the way you are? And then we can start dialogue. And it could be something very little, but that very little thing can eventually lead to something more. When we get to pantheism, and again, this is more of that newfound age spirituality where they say God is in everything and everything is God. So it's pan, that word is multiple. So a pantheistic religion means there's multiple gods. And God is not a person or anything like a person. It's it's very natural or nature centric. So it's, I see God in the beauty of the world, and that's not wrong because we know God created the world, right? So there is the touch of God in everything that we see. But to say that that tree is God, that's a very different thing. And so we're seeing that more and more because, again, it opens it up to that everyone can have their own personal gods, right? So I can have my own personal God, you can have your own personal God, and no one is right, no one is wrong. So that's where we see that spirituality opening up more to that. And then finally, we go to mysticism. So mysticism, it's that union with God or ultimate reality is the main focus. And to some extent, a lot of religions are like that. We all want to get closer to God, right? We all want to be one with God. We all want to get closer to Him in one way or another. The difference is, though, that with mysticism, they include two tenets or two main beliefs, right? One is either God is within you, or you need to do a deeper dive into yourself, and your own reality and others is God is outside the soul, and you reach Him in stages. Sorry, that and my nose is not helping me right now. But basically, it's saying that either God is within you or God is outside, and you have to work hard to get to Him. So again, these tenets, they can sound very similar to our Orthodox faith, right? Where it's we do believe that God is within us, right? And we do believe that we have to work hard to it. But again, when we talk about spirituality in the postmodern sense, it's almost as if we take out the sacraments. So I can still reach God without the sacraments. I can reach God without necessarily doing what the church has set out for us to do, right? Because the church is very much what leads us to God. It is, again, it has that absolute truth for us. But with mysticism, again, it's very broad. So yeah, when we take these three resulting beliefs, the agnosticism, we get what? Spirituality teaches that God, if He exists, can never be known. God is everything and everything is God. And the goal of spirituality is an experience with God. And that's where we get that mysticism. It's that experience that I'm reaching these different stages with God and I feel more spiritual, right? This is what we get from that spirituality in postmodernism. I know mysticism might be a little bit more difficult for people, so I always like to think of yoga. Some people feel like, oh, I feel so much more spiritually inclined or attuned now that I've done some yoga classes. Yoga has nothing to do with God. But to these people, it's like, oh, I'm at peace now. I experienced God in my meditation, right? And that's not exactly how we experience God. You know, yes, we can meditate, but we usually, when even in the church, we say we don't just sit there and sit quiet and that's all. We're thinking about God. That's our meditation. We will ponder on a verse and think about the beauty of God in that verse. There's a difference between, you know, we'll say the kingdom culture and the worldly culture of mysticism. Yeah.
So there's also this belief of people who will just meditate and they think they are seeing vision from God,
Mhm.
and they try to impose it over to you. Like those are other Christians on Orthodox.
Okay.
They would like say, okay, you know, I'm praying, I'm meditating right now, and I'm seeing like that's getting into what they try to impose that.
Mhm. And that's very interesting because it's you get that question. It's like, where did you get this from, or how do we know that this was really God or Satan, right? And I think it's very important that we see is what is the end result of their actions. Is it aligned with the kingdom culture or not? I always thought this was very interesting. I heard an Orthodox priest talk about when you're looking at the church fathers right now, there's still a lot of church fathers in the making that are bringing a lot of wonderful things into the church and knowledge into the church. But how they always decipher whether this is a church father or a heretic, it's let's look at all the previous work. Does it align with it? Does it maybe explain something that they mentioned before, but it's still the same thing? Or is it now contradicting one of the earlier church fathers? If it's contradicting, it is not from God, or it is a heresy, we'll say. I think it's very important for us to, when we get that, someone saying, oh, you know, I was meditating and I heard from God and they're going to try to push it. It's like, okay, let's go back to our kingdom culture. Does it align with it? If it aligns, then great. But if it's not aligning, that's dangerous because that could quite literally go into the kingdom culture if we let it. So you have to be very careful with that. I know a lot of Protestant faiths, they're like that, where it's, I speak in tongues, right? It's, again, that is a gift that God has given certain select people, right? But when you see videos of people just in the middle of their worship, they're just blah, 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 like, and you ask them, do you know what you said? No. I had a mystical revelation from God. Okay, so what happened? I started speaking in tongues. Okay, you don't know what you said. You don't think anything's changed afterwards. How does this align with our faith?
they are not necessarily telling you anything spiritual. Like they would say, okay, I'm meditating, I'm praying for you, but now I think God's telling you to, for example, travel to UK for like your
Oh, okay.
education, stuff like this. And the problem is you become, okay, I'm not actually sure now. Well, like
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think we,
I have seen that.
yeah.
Like someone's trying to do that would be like I cut them off and but like if this is happening with youth or people who are like on the edge
Yeah,
between two things, it becomes very
that's very difficult. So how would we deal with this? That's a great discussion point. Someone saying, God spoke to me and told me you have to go to the UK or this or that. How would we address that to them? Any ideas? Let me go speak with God. I like that. I always, I remember growing up, and again, going back to that Egyptian culture of you need to be a doctor, pharmacist, or engineer. Anything else is failure. My, and it's true. That's what we raised us, right? I remember. This is after I finished school, by the way. Someone said, like, does God really care about what you do? Like, really, does he care about what job you're working as? And it's like, no, he doesn't really care. He cares about my salvation first and foremost. If it leads to my salvation, great. If by doing this job I will get closer to God, great. But if I'm not going to get closer to God, God really wouldn't care about it because it's not bringing him closer. I'm not coming closer to him because of it, right? So a lot of people, maybe it's actually detrimental to their faith by becoming a doctor, pharmacist, or engineer, right? And again, I've seen that unfortunately with a lot of young youth where they felt so pressured that they do this and they hate it. They absolutely hate it. And then they start aligning. It's like, God, why would you let this happen to me? Therefore, you don't love me. Therefore, I don't believe in God, or God can't be real, right? So now this has actually now become detrimental. If anything, God would have preferred you not become a doctor, pharmacist, or engineer. I think with people like that, it's like, because who knows, there are people who are very spiritual. There are monks and priests who might say, you need to go to this monastery and speak to this person, and it might genuinely be a vision from God, right? But again, will this bring me closer to God? That's maybe the question I would want to ask myself, where if I'm a youth that's being asked this question, it's like, how is going to the UK going to help me get closer to God? And maybe that person just asked them that question as well. How you're telling me that you had this vision? Can you tell me how it's going to make me closer with God? And obviously, you pray about it, because first and foremost, we always have to pray. And maybe God, if it is the true vision from someone else, God will also give you more than one source. But that's a very interesting question, because I've never really had to deal with that myself personally. But you're right, it can very much happen. And then just as I mentioned with that last bit of spirituality, it's postmodern spirituality is all about me. And we have to be very careful with that, because spirituality is not about me. It is about God. And if we can keep that in mind when we talk about spirituality, it's about me giving to God, then we know at least we have the right kind of spirituality. Whereas if it's very selfish, there's something wrong with it. Then we get to selfism, and this is the one that I think we don't realize how often we fall into it ourselves. Selfism and its resulting beliefs, you get narcissism, hedonism, and materialism, right? Can you tell me, what is narcissism? Any idea? If someone's narcissistic, what does that mean? Self-centered. So self-centered, they love themselves so much. I am the greatest human being on earth. I gave this wonderful PowerPoint because I have a special brain and my mind works better than everyone else, and everyone needs to learn from me, right? That is narcissism. We become prideful and arrogant in our actions. We promote ourselves at the expense of others sometimes, where it's not we are all smart. It's I am smart, you are all not smart, right? It can even get to that point. Or you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what I know. I've gone through my own personal experiences, and therefore I know more than you. Right? Yes.
This is where it gets very interesting between, like, it's actually, is it a belief or a sickness? Like, is somebody need a psychologist or need somebody a teacher?
I think it depends on the level of narcissism that they have. To an extent, we are all narcissistic. To an extent, we all have a little bit of pride, right? Pride, that's maybe a Sunday school teacher issue. I believe that I am the greatest thing since the Messiah. That might be, you need a psychologist, right? And it becomes very tricky because it can lead to extreme highs and lows, where it's because I'm so narcissistic, if something commends this. So I thought I am so smart, and someone tells me, Kiro, you're so smart. See, I was right. I am the smartest person alive. But then I think I'm so smart and I make a mistake. You get to this extreme low because now it's almost part of that identity. I thought I was smart, but I made a mistake. What's going on now? You start questioning more. So it's very interesting because, like you said, narcissism, there's a lot of levels to it, and we can get to events where we can get depressions from it. I've seen people who are narcissistic to the extent where they fall into depressions because their whole world collapses when they're not able to achieve. I actually had a classmate of mine who was in pharmacy school, very smart individual, very, very smart. And because he was so smart, he always did well in school, always did well. From elementary school, like high 90s, didn't have to try very hard. Goes to university, first year of university, he still was doing pretty well. But then he starts seeing his grades slipping a little bit. Not that they were bad, but they were slipping. The moment he saw these grades slipping, he went for a full-on spiral. He could not handle that I am not perfect. He's like, and he literally stopped taking tests. He stopped showing up for classes because his whole personality was, I am the smartest. And unfortunately, he somehow still got into pharmacy school afterwards, after those first 2 years, because he had the first year grades that were still very good. But then come to pharmacy school, everyone's smart. Everyone, to an extent, is a high achiever. And he goes and tries to do a test and does not do well at all. Again, he starts going into these lows, and it starts affecting in his mental health to a point where, again, he needs to take medication. He does need to seek professional help, right? But where did it start? Maybe it started off when he was much younger, where it was just a little bit of pride that kept on getting, good job, Habibi, good job, good job. You're the smartest. Inta ahla ayil since this and this and that, right? And it just kept building up and building up and building up until it became a mental illness, right? So we have to be very careful with selfism when it comes to narcissism. Hedonism, this is a very interesting one because it's the belief that things that feel good are good. So it's changing that truth. If it feels good, it has to be good for me. If I am eating McDonald's and it tastes good, it's probably healthy for me. That's obviously not true, but this is the extent. So when it comes to sexuality, if I feel good because of my sexual orientation is not the norm, but I feel good and I'm happy, then it has to be good. And if it's good, you shouldn't disagree with me. You see how it kind of keeps going more and more. So it's overindulging is not bad. In fact, it's good. Instant gratification is good. That's the hedonism approach or belief. All things that feel good are good. And again, we get that a lot in universities and school nowadays. And it's funny because when we talk about the postmodernism, we see how all these are kind of related to each other, right? It's like, if you have this is probably also affecting you. If this is happening to you, this is also probably affecting you. So hedonism, as we're talking about truths and whatnot, and it's all relative, right? We see in hedonism, that's further pushing that agenda, right? If it feels good for you, then yeah, you should do it. There's nothing wrong with it. You're absolutely right in your means. And if someone argues with you, it's all relative. Because again, truth is all relative. And if God says that this is not right, then there is no God. Because God wouldn't want you to not be happy. It goes down this very interesting spiral. Right?
Isn't that the first sin?
Yeah. The first sin, it looks good, I want it. And it must be good. So that's actually very good. I'm gonna use that next time. And the other part is they don't look at long-term repercussions. So remember how I mentioned instant gratification? They're not looking at what's the consequence of this, right? So this is an issue that occurs with a lot of youth, and it's two parts. We're young, we don't think of long-term consequences. And B, it's if everyone's doing it, I'm seeing that everyone seems to be fine afterwards, then what's the big issue? There aren't any long-term consequences then, but what they don't realize is slowly it can affect. We know that with drugs, illicit drugs, you might not see the long-term effects right away. You might feel good that one moment, that instant gratification, but later on, when you're addicted to it and you've gone through this down like spiral of a path that's very negative, it's now affected you in a way where you can't come out of it, or it's very difficult to come out of it. Absolutely, absolutely, and they might not be very obvious, or the world's told us that it's good for you, so it's actually healthy, and they don't know what they're talking about. And then materialism, that's where they think of the physical as the greatest or highest value in life. So an example of materialism is if I get a good job, a high-paying job, if I have a nice house, nice car, then I am what? Obviously, I am successful. I have done everything right then because I got the nice car, I got the nice house, I got the beautiful life, whatever it is, right? This is that materialism that we're constantly plagued. And why do you think materialism is so much more important nowadays? Why would it be more important now than ever before? Mhm. But why? So why is it so important to have the best PC? Why is it so important? Like when we're talking about that culture. So let's dig down one more layer into that worldview, right? So we're talking about that worldview. Why is it so important to have materialism?
That's how you react. Like if you make your decisions or make your preferences based on what is the framework you're using to to decide on segments. So if there's no worldview, as you said, there's no church, there's no guidance. You're basically the only thing that's for you is, all right, I need a framework. I need to define what my success would look like.
Mhm.
And if that's the measure, that's the standard measure now, then you're stuck. Like you have no other ways.
So exactly, when we talk about success, a successful Christian is what? Someone who has found Christ. That is the measure of success for us. But if, like you said, we've taken God out of the equation, what else is left? It's material items. That's the only thing that's left. So now that's going to be my measuring stick for success. So I'm going to go and try to find whatever it is that's material because that's the greatest value to me because I have nothing else that's more valuable than the material. So it's because, again, postmodernism, we've removed God out of the equation. We've removed everything that's church related. The only measure of success is the material stuff, the job title, the car, the monies, all that other stuff. And so this is why it's become so much more plagued nowadays than ever before. Because again, God is removed out of the equation. And it's why I love when I go to the monastery, it's whenever we talk about the saints, who's the most successful saint? The one who's tortured the most, the one who is the poorest. Those are the people that are like, we look up to. It's almost, to the world culture, it's backwards. And I love it. I love it because when we look at the world culture, they will call us crazy. It's like, this is who you look up to? The person that was tortured for 7 years and lost all his value or all his material worth. That's the person that you say, oh, I want to be like. You're crazy. You're clearly crazy. That's what they would say about us. But we know the absolute truth is God. We know that our value, our worldview is Christ. The ultimate success is to be with God.
Okay, but I think this exact point is what makes younger generation like repel from the church, right? Because if you go to them and say, you know what, your ultimate success is to be Sam Paul, and you know you go live in the desert and nobody sees you for the next 95 years of your life. It's very difficult to relate to. So I think this where the discussion with younger generation need to get out. Okay, what is success in your mind? Is success is to drive a bigger car, or success is to be more comfortable? So I think going with an extreme definition of success, you know, you're losing the conversation. It's another stuff.
So
What do you want me to do? Like stop going to school now and just go live in a monastery? Like really?
So keep in mind what I'm trying to explain is what is our definition of success. I think it would be safe to say a definition of someone who's successful is someone who has come very close to Christ or come very close to God. I agree with you when we're having a conversation. This can be a discussion question. It's when a person says, "I want to be successful," how do you respond to that? That I agree with you with what you're saying. You don't want to go to an extreme and then throw them off. But the goal should be, and I would push back that hopefully all our youth, I would pray that all our youth eventually say, I want to be like St. Paul. I want to be like this. If they all think that, that's amazing. You've made a transformation in your youth. Obviously, we're not going to get there overnight. Obviously, we're not going to be able to transform everyone like that. But I would say at least let's change their idea of success from material to something more spiritual.
All right. So to this point, I don't want to say I disagree, but is it really the success is to make every Sunday school child a sample, or you start defining success as, okay, God, you have a purpose here in life. You know, if you're very good at academics, you study well, you project God's your God image in your whatever it is that you're doing. So present God in a successful way, right? If you're good at sports, you know, you're
Glorifying God.
you know, you're gonna good at this and you're gonna succeed at this, and you're projecting that image. And this is like, this is what I think the definition of success being, we want to have every one of the school children St. Paul, or you know, I don't think it's even what we want for them, right?
I don't think the church ever was
I agree.
because there are saints in the church that we love that were successful, like man, they were like, sure, they were very successful. Ma'alim Ibrahim Gohari, he was a very rich person. Like, I don't think that the church ever was preaching the old and old, but knowing God is the ultimate.
The ultimate.
So know God in your own version, like know God in your own way and be very close to God. This is the real success. How you reach to that
It's different.
Yeah, and that's
I think we're all saying the same thing in the end.
Yeah.
I think we're all saying the same thing in the end. But when we come back to that definition, it's what is success? It's being close with God. That's what we want. We want them to be close. If they happen to also have a lot of money, that's great. But is it affecting that overall success of being close with God? That's the question.
I think what success, that's in my
Yep.
like I would say success is you use the talents God's given you towards something meaningful or something productive.
Productive to what?
Productive to both, like to the world around you and to yourself, to your, you know, to your spiritual growth, or your, you know, getting closer to God. But there is no contradiction between using your talents to be, you know, what to do something productive to your community and people around you and to yourself. That doesn't mean a bigger car or a bigger house. Whatever this productive thing is, you know.
I agree with 100%.
Right? And then that's the definition. That would be a success.
I think we're saying the same thing in the end. What we're trying to get at is, I'm just saying that success, like you said, it's using your talents that God gave you to be productive in society and whatnot. But when you're saying you also want to give to God something. You want to glorify God. When you glorify God, are you not getting closer to Him?
Yes.
So we're technically saying the same thing, but it's, I think it's just how we're saying it.
I would say, yes, I agree. It's just the only thing I found with the, again, go back to the same discussion we're having earlier. The younger generations, so much information coming their way. I found you need to be very clear
Absolutely.
with what you're saying is in terms of, because if you were not very clear, just giving them a broad definition, it seemed to be more confusing than not.
Yes. So understanding in that term, the definition I'm giving you for success is what I tell you. That's not necessarily what you're going to be telling them. It's we want to work their way up ideally. Like I would love it if, I start off a kid, just use your talents for good. Not anything evil, just do something good with it. Okay, maybe we can pray. That's gonna be success is maybe just praying once a week, maybe, or attending liturgy. That's success because you're taking communion and it grows and grows and grows to a point where maybe that child, you want to dedicate your life to God, no matter how you want to do it, but you're gonna dedicate using your talents to glorify Him. Then we've reached a successful state for that person, right? But I'm not gonna tell them from the beginning, go dedicate your life to God, because that might be an impossible jump for them, right? So I agree with you on that, and that's why I think we're saying the same thing. It just we're getting there. But so yeah, when we see this all, so selfism, it causes us to focus on ourselves. That's the definition of it. You're focusing on yourself, and you put priority on the physical appearance and everything that it relates to. It's seen in tech, fashion, entertainment, whatever it is. And it becomes the strongest message in selfism is that we must fight for our own selves. Everything again is about us. It's all about me. And when we can show them an example of someone who's not focused on themselves, that's the person who's not successful. If they're not focusing on themselves, they're not successful. And that's what selfism is all about. Selfism, to be successful, it's all about you, your own personal glory, your own personal gains. So when we talk about influences on the youth culture, so there's a few different things. Talking about, again, the postmodernism, right? So globalization of world culture. So we've just talked about postmodernism and how we were talking about the Renaissance, and we talked about back in was just a very small Western world, and then that Western world expanded, right? And we keep seeing this world culture affecting everywhere. I think the one thing that shocks me the most is when we go to Egypt now, even Egypt has a touch of that Western culture now. I think that was very unique to me because I thought Egypt is the safe haven. We'll never see any of Western culture in Egypt, but it's there now. It's starting, right? So this globalization of world culture is now affecting youth everywhere. And it's also almost empowering them even more because it's like, oh, well, the youth over here are also doing the same thing that I'm doing here, and they're doing that, I'm doing that. So it's like, we're all one, we're all doing the same thing, so it has to be right. And because it's, known worldwide, it's now becoming a truth. When something it's like commonly accepted for everyone, it's now a truth. That's how they view it. Regardless if it's right or wrong, it's the truth. And I even think of certain sports sometimes. When we talk about culture and sports, I don't think basketball was as popular as it was 50 years ago. It wasn't. But if we notice it, and I always try to bring it back to actually one specific basketball player. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with basketball, but there was a basketball player named Allen Iverson. He played for the Philadelphia 76ers. He was not the typical basketball player. Typical basketball players before him, they would wear a suit to go to play basketball. They were very professional. He came in with baggy pants, not wearing a suit, listening to rap music, doing all these other additional things. He was almost breaking the mold of what a traditional basketball player and trying to show that it's cool to be a basketball player. And he was almost connecting it with the culture of the world. And by doing that, he might have not realized what he was doing, but he ended up causing a big shift in that basketball popularity, where it's the cool thing to watch. Maybe I enjoy watching soccer more, but it's cool to watch basketball. And I'm going to watch it more so I can be more in the know. And so it's so interesting how there's that sense of belonging to the main group, where it's, again, if it's been globalized everywhere, I know what everyone else is listening to, so I want to listen to it as well. I also think of music. I think it's so interesting because you would hear of the Korean pop stars. I'm thinking, this is Korea, like it's nowhere near me, yet there was a big time where there was that dance Gangnam Style. There's now the Korean pop band BTS. There's the Squid Games for like Netflix. All these crazy things that have nothing to do with the Western world, but now we've been influenced by it because it's now that sense of belonging to the main group. And if we can introduce that into that main group and everyone accepts it, it becomes now a worldwide phenomenon. There's also the subgroups of culture that we see that the youth are affected by. When I was in pharmacy school, we had the rows of the school, like, so there's the lecturer at the very front, and then there's one side over here where there's seats, one side over here, and then the main row. So it would actually be separated within the school. So the one on the left side, they were all the, we'll say European children, or the white people, right? So they were all on the left side. We used to joke around and say that's the European Union. On the right side, there was all the Indians and brown people. So it's like that was Brown Town, right? And then in the center, there was the Asians, the Keeners, so they almost like everyone separated themselves. So even though we were all one class, there was subcultures. So you could see the people, the European Union, they had a very interesting laid back personality where they studied hard, they did everything, but they also were relaxed when it came down to it. You would see the Brown Town that they're very resourceful. They might have maybe one person would be taking down notes and then everyone else is relaxed. And then it's like, let's exchange notes later on, right? They're being resourceful to each other. The Asians, they're right at the front. It's, I'm gonna study day and night all the way till the end, right? It was very interesting how despite it was one class, there were subcultures within it. And these subcultures affected the youth. I also find it interesting with myself because I was affected by it when I was in high school. When I was in elementary, I wasn't the smartest kid, so I took on that persona. It's, I am not the smartest kid, and this is my personality. High school kicked in. I started getting 80s and 90s. I was like, oh, I'm smart. So then, therefore, I need to be that nerd kid and need to be very smart. I started acting in a different way, and now when I grow up, I think it was like, why did I do this? Why wasn't I just myself, the same person throughout? But it's because I started picking up on the subculture. So there was a subgroup or a certain group that I felt that I associated with. So I'm going to act that way. And this is something that the youth are challenged with because they're influenced by these subcultures within the wider variety. And you might find, again, that one youth might be more pulled towards a certain entertainment. For example, it's, I like video games, so I'm the gamer, I'm the video gamer person. And their personality might revolve around that one thing, right? We're seeing it more and more because of these subcultures. And then we talk about urbanization. So urbanization is something that a lot of people from rural communities have now shifted and gone to the urban cities. I always laugh at, I had this one friend of mine who came from a farm. He would always tell me stories about how his goat would eat the fence and just things I would have never experienced living in a city, right? And then when he came to the city, his personality starts to change to match the urbanized culture, right? So it's because they want to be more successful, they move to an urban city. Because they moved to this urban city, their personality was also changed. So again, this is something that might affect certain youth. We can even say a lot of us Egyptians who left Egypt, right, to move to Canada for a better life, to be more successful, whatever it might be, right? We found ourselves changing to match the personality of what was around us. So it's that urbanization is also happening. And then reduction has caused people to deal with issues at a younger age. And this is something I'm very sad about. When we talk about reduction and when we talk about youth, it's the struggles I might have faced are going to be maybe the same struggles someone might face, but 10 years younger. The struggles you might have faced now might be something that your children might be facing in a few more years, right? So this reduction, it's forcing them to deal with it, but they don't necessarily have the tools to deal with it. We have maybe grown up a little bit. We've been able to mature, understand right from wrong. They might have not had that opportunity. They're just being force-fed all this information, as we said, right at the get-go. And it's like, deal with it, figure out what your truth is. It's like, I don't know what the truth is because I am not old enough to know what the truth is. But unfortunately, they're forced that way. There's actually a little video that I thought was very interesting talking about internet, and I'll show it to you guys a little bit later. But we talk about shapers of youth culture. So when we're talking about the youth culture, these are some of the things that can affect youth. So we know the entertainment industry, that for sure 100% affects youth. We know that internet will affect the youth. We know technology, print media, books, right? Marketing, what we see online on the TV, the channels, commercials, whatever it is, billboard ads, and then finally schools. So all those will be things that can affect you. And you'll see it all in your textbooks, the exact things. But one thing I always say that I thought was very interesting about the entertainment industry, it's some things we don't even know we've been influenced by that has happened in the entertainment industry because we heard it from a friend, from a friend, from a friend. And so it's like, oh, okay, I like it. Or yeah, I'll say the same word too, but I have no idea where the context came from or where it originated. So I know Kim Kardashian, I'm sure you've all heard of her. She made a slang term called occur or something like that. Again, not many people know it right now, but there was a fad where everyone was saying it. And a lot of people didn't know where it originated from. It's just my friend was saying it, so then I'm going to start saying it. And so you might actually be 7 degrees removed from the actual thing, but you've been influenced by it. So I'm going to try to show you guys a video. Hopefully you guys can hear it. I'm not sure. I might have to put the mic to this. And this is about the internet, as we were talking about.
I want to start by taking you guys back a little ways to 1994. You remember 94? Where you lived, school, work, what your hair looked like? I decided to shave mine that year for some reason. But 94, Bill Clinton's in the White House. Forrest Gump's in the theaters. We first met Joey, Ross, Rachel, the rest of our friends. I turned 20 in 1994. That means as a 40-year-old today, it's the halfway point of my life so far. And something significant happened in 1994. It's the first year I accessed the internet. The first year I got online. Now, the heavens didn't part and trumpets didn't blare that I had entered this new era, but that's exactly what happened. I entered a new era. From there to today, I on-ramped into the digital information superhighway. First, email address. Remember your first email address? First website, first laptop, first digital device. And that's the luxury that young people don't have today. We've taken them and we've tossed them right in this raging current, and we're expecting them not to drown. And they are. And we see it play out every day on the news. Cyberbullying, sexting scandals, suicides. It's not okay. Our nonprofit Above the Fray ran some youth focus groups last year. We talked to a lot of kids. We have an online survey. And what these kids told us blew our minds. Only about 15% of young people are having conversations with their parents about their activities online. Gaming consoles, social media, texting. That means that 85% aren't. 85% aren't. When I entered the digital world at 20, I had life experience. Crashed car, girlfriend, failures, success, triumphs, joys, but those played out in my neighborhood, and played out at home, played out at school. Kids today, they don't have that luxury either. Growing up, as we call it, it's happening online in front of the entire world. So our nonprofit is dedicated to getting parents involved in their kids' digital lives, having proactive conversations before issues pop up, before we have to call in the DA's office, the sheriff's department to do the scared straight thing at school, right? Because that's what's happening. We're a reactive society when it comes to helping our kids online. So with the little bit of time I have left, I want to tell you why I'm so passionate about this and why I spend my time speaking to PTA groups, church groups, civic groups about this. I was at the grocery store about a year and a half ago with my daughters, 6 and 8 at the time. And we're in the checkout aisle, you know, that cavernous checkout aisle. You've got the candy and the gum, the magazines, right? Huge rack of magazines. And I'm looking at my daughters and they're looking at the magazines. I'm looking at my daughters and they're looking at the magazines. And I'm looking at my daughters and they just can't take their eyes off these magazine covers. So I glance over. Fitness, celebrity gossip, tabloid journalism. And it hit me at that moment that this is what my kids are seeing online all the time if I'm not there to curate it, if I'm not there to help them. And this is a finite moment. We're going to be out of this checkout aisle in just a couple of seconds. But out there, that's the image barragement that's happening. Then a couple of days later, I started thinking, man, what would life have been like for me as a 13, 14, 15-year-old with the added pressures of Instagram, Snapchat, Tumblr, Twitter. And that was a gut punch that almost brought me to my knees. I started thinking about the pressure. You guys remember being 13, 14, 15? Remember the pain, the confusion, the anger, the angst? Just normal life, right? Growing up. Imagine it being magnified for the entire world without your parent there to help you. It's almost too much for me to think about when I really started to feel what that would have been like. So our plea is to get parents involved with their kids' digital lives. We don't hand over the keys to the car without teaching them how to drive. So why do we give them these devices? Why do we give them these laptops? Why do we give them all of the information in the known universe and say, don't screw up? That's on us. Our goal is to help parents parent online, just like we parent offline. Thank you.
So what did everyone think of that video? Could you guys hear it well enough? Yeah. Well, what really struck with me was the part where he says, you don't give the kids the key to the car and expect them to figure it out, right? And it hit me even more because I remember growing up, my dad would let my brother drive and he'd watch him when he was younger, but I wouldn't be allowed until I was much older because again, they didn't trust me, and that makes sense, right? So it's quite literally, when we think of the bombardment of information that these kids get, they have a lot of pressure on them, and the expectation is they're going to know how to deal with it. And it's unfortunate because we are seeing it more and more, even with psychology, where it's like, what does the kid want? They're kids. They don't know what they want yet. They're still developing. Let them develop first, and then we can, let them make some decisions that can affect them permanently, right? But unfortunately, again, this is the world we live in. We've given them all this information, and they have to figure it out. So it's part of our job is to helpfully guide them, to be their support, because sometimes, as he mentioned, only 15% talk about these things with their parents. So that other 85%, that's where we can come in and start talking to them about it. This is where we can be involved more and letting them know this is not all right, or we have to be careful with this. I remember hearing a very scary fact, something like about 80%, and I can't remember the exact statistic. I can find it out for you. But they were talking about statistics about pornography sites, and they said about 80% of searches online have to do with some kind of pornographic content. And I thought that was insane, because they also said the number of websites, like thinking of all the information online, a majority of it is dedicated to pornography. It's like, how do we expect our children to survive when this is all they're bombarded with constantly? So it becomes very dangerous from the world culture, because they're expecting them to do what's right. They're expecting them to know what's right, and they don't. And we at least have had that opportunity. And the adults that are making these laws, they grew up where they were able to decipher and make a decision on their own, right? A lot of these kids now that are being affected by it don't have that opportunity to grow up. And I think of that, it's a very scary sight, and it's why it's so important that we're here and we're doing what we're doing. So we'll do this and then we'll take a quick break. What to expect from this culture. So because youth have been molded from such a young age, and this culture has proved to us to be a big influencer on them, there is an expectation that, you know, the culture will be part of who they are. Whether their parents are great parents, whether their parents, you know, have tried to keep them within their own personal culture, they are going to be affected by this outside culture to some extent. To some extent, there will be some influence. We tend to find a group who think about how things can benefit themselves before they help others. That's selfism, if you remember we talked about. So we know that the culture is all about the self, the me. So we're seeing it there. And they tend to believe that it's only through their hard work things can be achieved. You had mentioned this earlier. What can we do half the times that really make a change? Prayer. Sometimes things are out of our control. Some things are truly out of our control, but the culture says you are in control of everything and you have the power to make change. And that's not a bad thing in and of itself, you know, that we want to work hard, that we want to achieve, right? But when we say that is the only way we can achieve, again, we're taking God out of the equation and it becomes difficult. And then we also see from this culture, because again, people become very prideful, that narcissism, right? We say what? The ego can be very fragile. And so because the ego is so fragile, if they receive criticism, that can really affect them mentally. And we see a lot of mental instability with a lot of people because of this. Technology has linked us to almost every aspect. I can see right now myself, I have my phone, my watch, my computer. So we really are linked to technology all the time. And because we're linked to technology all the time, we're bombarded with world culture, and it comes to us every single minute of every single second. So this is what we can expect from the culture that's affecting our youth. Right, we're gonna take a little break now. It's 5 o'clock. We'll give us 10 minutes, and then we'll reconvene. Okay, so we just talked about what to expect from the culture. There is one final video about this that I'm going to show you all, and after that we'll have a little bit of a case study.
The importance of empathy. We all live in our own version of reality, a reality that is limited by our senses, our temperament, and our own experiences. It is the only reality we will ever truly know. But it is crucial to our personal development, our relationships, and to society itself that we make the effort to try and experience other people's realities as well. This is done through empathy. Simply stated, empathy is an active attempt to understand another person's perspective, their emotions, and in essence, their reality. We are social animals, and our ability to communicate and understand each other's emotional states is key to maintaining our relationships. So it is little wonder that the ability to empathize is hardwired directly into our brains. One area that assists in this process is the right supramarginal gyrus, which helps us to distinguish our own emotional state from that of another person, and plays a key role in our ability to observe and assess what other people are experiencing. Studies from Neuron Science Journal suggest that we have systems of mirror neurons in our brains that cause us to mimic the actions of others. That is why when we see someone yawn, we will often yawn in reply. And when we observe someone experiencing joy or pain, we experience the same sensation to a certain extent. But these reactions are primarily driven by subconscious reflexes. In order to be truly empathic, you have to actively think beyond yourself and your own concerns. You can develop this empathic skill by practicing some simple habits. Be observant of others. We tend to spend the majority of our day dwelling on ourselves, caught up in our own daily routines and digital distractions. But taking the time to observe others around you is a good first step in developing your empathy. Watch and wonder. Try to focus on the person's state of being rather than categorizing or labeling them. Ask yourself, what kind of day are they having? How are they feeling? Challenge yourself to genuinely care about their well-being. Curiosity about others is the first step to expanding your empathy. Use active listening. During a conversation, especially a heated one, most people formulate the response before the other person even finishes their statement. This form of communication is more verbal combat than an exchange of ideas or opinions. Avoid this reflex by slowing down. Rather than rushing to reply, take a moment to consider the other person's statement. Ask follow-up questions to better understand what the speaker intended. Try to understand their emotional state and the deeper motivations behind their statement. What life experiences led them to their current worldview? Remember, you don't need to share someone's opinion in order to understand it and acknowledge it. And listening will help inform and expand your own opinion. Open up. Learning more about other people's experiences is a key element to seeing the world through someone else's eyes. But it is also important to open up about your own feelings and experiences. Empathy is a two-way street that at best is built upon mutual understanding. Through a combination of uncovering the deeper motivations of someone else's position and expressing our own underlying concerns, we often discover a shared commonality, even with those who hold different beliefs than ours. Through the practice of keeping an open mind, empathy helps us challenge prejudice, find commonality, and expand our moral universe. Without it, we are apt to label people outside our circle as the other, the problem, or the enemy. These labels draw lines in the sand that prevent us from moving forward or growing. It cuts us off from the realization that the human experience is a shared experience. We have much more in common than we think, and are really just seeing small variations of the same reality.
So why would I show you guys a video about empathy? Why do you think? Any ideas?
I think because it can be misunderstood. Empty, not necessarily. Like you look at this video and it seems like everything it's saying
Mhm.
makes sense
Mhm.
until you lose track of your own values and get
Mhm.
more like so MC is always free.
Yeah.
In a way it is, but at the same time that doesn't mean it's influence.
Absolutely.
Influence your discussion, influence how you handle the conversation, but it doesn't have to influence your values. I think that will be this is where most like a lot of people misunderstand what they could be.
Mhm. So how about in the context of what we just learned about the culture and whatnot? Why would I want you guys to understand empathy or understand why it's so important when we're talking to the youth? Let's put it that way.
Because our experiences are very different. Because our experiences are different from theirs. We have different backgrounds.
Mhm.
Like we grew up in different worlds.
Yeah.
It's not just like education.
Mhm.
It's the whole world changed. And we have to understand where they're coming from, be empathetic over their
Absolutely.
worldviews.
Absolutely. And that's really the main just as to why it's, and I like what you added that it's like we can't let empathy change our thought process, but we do need to be able to empathize with the person to understand what they're going through, to be able to communicate with them and have that lasting discussion point with them so that there can be that open line of communication that they can come to you for their confidant, or if they have an issue, it's not this person is so far removed from me, he doesn't understand what I'm saying, right? We need to make sure that we can empathize with them so that we can be able to help. Let's put it that way. So before we get to the laws of communication, and we're gonna very quickly go into that, I want to spend the next 15 minutes doing the case study. If you remember the 3 youth that we talked about last week, we're gonna be kind of following along with them and just applying what we've learned. So last time we had talked about how we would want to discuss things with them, right? This time I want us to talk about, let's try to understand why they are the way they are. So based on these different personalities, what do you think might have affected them to make them like this? And obviously we understand there's the nature, some of them are just naturally like this, but there's also the nurture aspect. So I want to get to, based on what we've learned about the culture, the society, what could have influenced them to be the way they are. All right, so we'll split up. People online will have the last person, the introvert, right? This side, you guys can have the high achiever. The other side can have the person who is not so worried, or the popular guy, All right, and let's see what we can talk about, just understanding them a little bit more. All right, so we have 15 minutes. At 5:30, we will reconvene.
But like you want us to kind of like discuss what could shape the personality and
Essentially, so what kind of cultural values might they have been exposed to shape them the way they are? All right. And again, we understand that there is that nature, so some of them might have naturally been, say, competitive or whatever, but what else could have added to this personality or made it worse? So as we even said before with narcissism, remember, someone might be prideful or whatever, but the culture around him was trying to hyper encourage him to the point where you can never do anything wrong. And that led to more and more of that narcissistic belief, right? So something like that is kind of what I'm looking for, right? We're good? People online, can you hear me? There are, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 of you. If you guys can discuss that last person, again, what kind of culture might he be or he or she have been exposed to allow them to be the way they are? And as we said, nature has a part to play in it, but we're talking about the nurture. What around their environment could have caused them to do this? All right? Discuss within yourself, so you have to be unmuted or at least typing. Yeah, I think that's common about that. We're talking about the type of high achiever, that is the ones that lack what they're doing. So could be accepted to the type of understanding like yes, I can do the right thing. The goal, the goal, not necessarily that they are the problem.
yeah, I mean, that's the goal. I don't feel like that's actually why.
That's one of the
In my getting much of other people down the line. high achiever actually in most cases, because the achievement is.
Not necessarily. Put a few examples, not all of them will apply. I think yeah, high achiever. But I think that my high achiever will not have a will they always sit the technology around because I'm a high achiever. That's again not the justification.
I see that, yeah, but that's when you use your.
Not necessarily help. It's their own will. They realize that I am like a narcissist. Right? Where it's like, I am right. I'm the best. I'm the smartest. Right? And because I'm the smartest, everyone wants to be around me.
But this is.
They are the most famous.
People want to be around. It's not playing. They focus on their.
The parents also might have something to do with that in mind. So be accepted by the parents. So there's a lot of very good athletes that don't like the sport that they're in.
Sure. Yes,
But they're very good at it.
they go ahead because they push you.
Or to get that acceptance.
So I think what we're going to do is that we can spend this, very.
Absolutely. And there's no right or wrong.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
No. I think they are all different to. The next thing goes up, because this is the thing, they will reach out. They don't need to. Right?
But let's go back to the culture. Let's go back to the culture with this. What do you think could have influenced them, or what might have influenced them to be the way they are? So if we're talking about acceptance, you said narcissism could be something that could affect this, right? And just to be the smartest or whatever. So that's all like you really want to find out, because you're right. There's lots of different situations with different people and different things. Let's think of again back to the point of what could have caused them to be like this.
Yeah, and the problem is because we don't know this.
Yeah, you don't know the full story. But that's the thing. There's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. Yeah, and make some assumptions. Go for it. How's it going, guys? What are some thoughts so far?
Hypothesizing.
I like hypothesizing. People online, are you communicating with each other?
No.
Just one. Yeah. If you want, we might need some help with the last one. I don't think the people online are actually communicating, interacting.
You can. create versions, you can actually create like groups.
Yes.
So you have to groups of
Force
people.
them.
and that goes on
Well, there's
and
only
on.
3 people online.
Only three.
3 people. There's only 3. I have no idea. My first class wasn't very good. So. See, my narcissism is being affected now. People don't like me. Clearly. No, everyone else is bad. It's not me. The last one. We have 2 more minutes. First person. You guys had a little bit of a discussion. Do you want to tell me kind of what you felt shaped that person a little bit?
I think what we're trying to do is like we can translate
Mhm.
this description in many different ways.
Yes.
Right? So one of them would be if for example, the parents are pushing the child to be very successful in whatever they do
Mhm.
in school,
Yeah.
For example,
Mhm.
leaving pharmaceutical, doctor, that can make the kid very competitive
Mhm.
and the social acceptance in topics like accepted by the family.
Mhm.
I see this from a different perspective where you can actually see the kid is just, naturally is high achiever, and that usually gets them into a state where they don't really pay too much attention to
Mhm.
the social setting. It's actually the other way around. It's like usually because of their success, other people try to compete with them.
Mhm.
So the competitive personality isn't necessarily so concerned with social with the relationships with people
Mhm.
around them. They just care about being so self-centered.
Mhm.
I want to achieve what I'm here to achieve. I
Yeah.
don't care about making friends with people around me.
Mhm.
Which would be a complete opposite to what we're trying to do here. Like it's not really fully accepted. And it doesn't really pay too much attention to being accepted.
Mhm.
It's a acceptance come from others around them is trying to associate with the successful
Mhm.
person or the competitive person. So it's like I guess what I'm trying to get to is like there is so many couple different angles where you can actually see this kind of personality. But in all cases, if it's coming from internal, like this is the way they naturally are. It's usually the people around them will try to reach out to them. If it's coming from being pushed into this, being the high achiever, it's they are the kind of people looking for
Mhm.
acceptance by others.
Very good. So I have a question for you. Going back to what we learned about secularism, what kind of belief systems do you think might have affected him? Based on what you're telling me, I could think of a couple of very specific isms that could have affected him. What do
Yeah,
you
it could
think?
be narcissism. it could
Narciss-
be,
What else?
Yeah, selfism.
Selfism. And then the other one I was thinking of is materialism.
Materialism, yeah.
I think that one could have been very much affecting the motivation of a lot of the things that they're doing, right? They're very focused on the material. And it's again very interesting because when we think of it in that perspective, when we know kind of what their motivation behind certain actions are, what their behavior is and why they're behaving the way they are, we can start speaking their language almost, right? And that's kind of what I want to get out of this. It's how do I try to understand the person in front of me so that I can figure out what it is that I can really, that trigger point to say, let's get you to where we need to get you to. Or if you're walking away from, or you're heading in the wrong direction, how do we steer you back in a way that you accept it?
What's the motive?
What's the motive? So on that point then, if say that person was an agnostic or agnosticism, do you think they would be a strong agnostic or a weak agnostic? What do you think?
We are from the agnostic. A competitive person probably would be very, would be very strong in their opinion. They're
Yeah.
not gonna be taking things lightly.
Mhm.
Like most likely, it's not like a must be.
Very good. No, and you're absolutely right. In the case of this person, it was either hot or cold.
Yeah.
It's I either really did believe this or I did not believe this. Or if I'm questioning God, like I am questioning God. So
I have a question for you.
yes.
You come across situations where younger kids actually takes this being ultra competitive to be, let's say, a deacon or
Yeah.
or the hands that want to be like behind the microphone all the time, and it may appear like they're very associated with the church,
But they're
but
not.
it's actually for the very wrong motive.
That's a very good point.
All right, I'm just asking.
That's actually very interesting. You mentioned that. I'll give you a very interesting point. I'm just going to jump into that second person, the popular guy. I remember they were actually very good with hymns, extremely good, and picked up things very, very well. Motives might have not always been the best. Let's keep it simple. And it's because of that, that's where we had issues later on in life. So that's very, very good that you mentioned that. What is the motive behind it? Because you're right. A lot of them, I'm forced to do this. I'm going to learn it because maybe I'm ultra competitive. I'm going to be good at it,
Yeah.
but I don't have the right motive behind it. So it's the parents are pushing me, and it's almost when we go back to the secularism that we learned, or the different types of isms from postmodernism. It's this is my parents' truth. My parents believe that if I do this, I will be holy. I'm going to make my parents happy because if I make my parents happy, they will be good to me. They will give me this. They will give me that. So they all just learn the hymns just for the sake of learning him. So it's a very good point that you bring up. And it's hard to decide because how do you know if they're actually what their motive is? And I would go back to what else are they doing, right? If it's I'm a deacon on Sunday, but on Saturday night I am at the party drinking and this and that. It's like I maybe questioned a little bit. What is the motive? Why are you learning this? Why are you doing this? Right? Let's look at the person as a whole and see what it is, because I think it'll be easier to find that motivation, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Sometimes it's easy, like even if they are like deacons for the wrong motives,
Mhm.
that's better than.
100%.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's a good start.
It's still a step in the right direction. Absolutely. I would just say the only thing though that, and I go back to one person I know, they were a deacon. They didn't have the right motives. And again, not to say that they shouldn't have learned. I still agree that they should, but I remember what happened to them was they were talking inside the Heikel, and another like older gentleman, right? You're in the altar. He got so upset, so offended, after that, it was a downward spiral of I don't want to go to church anymore. And from I don't want to go to church, it's does God really exist? And then there was kind of the weak agnosticism where it's even if he does exist, I don't care. Right. So it's interesting because the motives can actually lead you to a very specific part, or it's almost it is the guiding principles of you, and despite what you might have already learned, it might not make a difference because your motives behind it weren't what you needed. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it goes back to communication with other people or somebody speaking. I think it's not about what they do at any given time. It's about why.
Why they
they
do.
what they do, what's it want. I think it's a very important part of the conversation.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I was just in a servants meeting today and they were talking about, different environments can allow kids, and we're talking about little kids, right? But we're talking about how different environments can be better for other children, specific children. So if maybe it's a more active environment with more activities, maybe one child might be more engaged versus another one who isn't as engaged, right? So it's what's the motive behind them? Because unfortunately, and I know myself being the worst at this growing up, I thought the child who was quiet was the best behaved child, and they're the ones that are most engaged. But that didn't necessarily mean that they were the most engaged. Whereas the one that was hyper and running around and everything, maybe they were actually listening the best. But I thought they were the worst. They were the worst. No, they weren't paying attention and this and that. So it's very interesting what the motive. Maybe they're just hyper. They're a hyper child and they need some movement. But their intentions aren't, I want to make the class miserable or I want to annoy my Sunday school teacher. That's not their motive. But if I were to actually try to sit and try to get to their level, empathize with them, understand why they're doing what they're doing, I could have been able to react differently. So it's very interesting that you mentioned that what are their motives behind it, because that really does make a difference. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. So we talked about the first one. Let's talk about number 2. So why do you think he is behaving the way he's behaving, or what has led him to his behavior?
So we discussed also a few things about him. One observation could be that he's just in his comfort zone. He's laid out, he found this being the guy who knows everything about trends and so on. People like it.
Mhm.
That works for me. So
Okay.
I'm just happy there. It said he's not worried about being accepted by others. Maybe because he already found out that what he's doing already got him acceptance. It may not necessarily indicate that he maybe it doesn't tell us whether he's accepted at home, not accepted at home, his behaviors are acceptable at home or no. That could be something that would need to may just not be very clear. He's already preoccupied by knowing all the trends or everything, so maybe he just doesn't that's why he doesn't want to focus in youth meetings. He knowing what's happening around him is more than enough for him to occupy himself with what's happening in the youth meeting itself. Another perspective could be though he doesn't want to risk his popularity by being maybe more involved. Meaning that popular guy just creating a shell or a face, but that does not necessarily mean that that's how he truly thinks. Or he's unable to express his, could be he's not able to express his true thoughts because he found out when he's popular, when he knows the stuff, people like him, but he wouldn't want to risk that and try to be more involved, try to be a bit more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just doesn't want to change his. Could be just he doesn't want to change his social place. So it could be that's just who he truly is. He just has this ability to be to occupy the place, or he just creating a self a defense mechanism, or just a layer, so he doesn't really want to show what he is. Does that compromise or affect how people live?
Okay. So I have a question for you again, same question as before. The different types of isms, what do you think might have affected his thought process or behavior? Which of the different isms?
plate, definitely. There was one that was talking about the distraction plate.
Well, say that
There was one that was talking about distraction by entertainment.
by entertainment. Okay, so you're getting close.
Part of selfism.
Okay.
Materialism, maybe?
Materialism, very possible, absolutely. Definitely, that would have been one of the things. Have you thought of hedonism? Yes.
If it feels good,
Just do it. Exactly. So it's understanding that there have been some positive reinforcements with a lot of these behaviors that have allowed them to keep doing what they're doing. So this person, he's not worried about being accepted by others. And I think you guys were very spot on when he said, like, he knows that people come to him because he knows all the trends and all that. So that's a type of positive reinforcement. It's telling him what you're doing is right. It feels good. So I want to know the trends. I want to go to youth meetings. So if he will go to the youth meetings, that usually means something. That means that there is something there that he's enjoying. But the second part to it is what he doesn't focus on what's being said or going through the lesson. So he doesn't care about the lesson, but he cares about what the people there. Exactly. So that makes a big step. So this person specifically, I know they were very big on, I want to get to know people. I want to, as much as they didn't care about being accepted, they wanted to, again, socialize, we'll say. They want to talk to people, right? And so it's part of that hedonism approach. And again, this is grade 11. As they moved on to university, that expanded to much more, how do I put it, behaviors that weren't accepted by the church, right? But it started off with what? I like talking to people. It makes me feel good, and there's no repercussions. I don't care about not really attending or attending the youth meeting itself. I don't care about the repercussions of that. I care more about, let's have fun. Let's do what I feel is nice. So I enjoyed talking to people. I enjoyed meeting up with people. That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm going to focus on, right? The trends, again, it's knowing the trends allows me to have that communication with the others. So again, it's positive reinforcement to say, I want to keep talking about these things, or I'm going to continue to stay on the trends. There's obviously, and again, keep in mind, guys, I'm giving you guys very small snippets of these people. They are a lot more elaborate, and there's a lot more that's led them to these points in their lives, or where they moved later on in the future, right? With this person, it was very unfortunate because they are no longer in the church, or we'll say they're still Christian, but they're not attending regularly or anything like that. They are living a very hedonistic approach to their lives, right? And obviously we pray for them. We pray that they find Christ sooner and faster. But the idea behind it is that these little things that are in high school, these little things that might not seem all that harmful, with enough positive reinforcement can lead to more and more dangerous behaviors. I remember hearing a comment actually in a sermon recently. They were talking about alcohol. And the priest originally, he was saying, there's no specific Bible verse that says alcohol is a sin. So nothing actually specifically says that, right? But he also said on the flip side, he's like, I am not going to say to you guys, oh, it's fine to drink alcohol, right? What he was trying to say is everything that God made is perfect. Everything that God made is good for us. We cannot say that something that God created is evil, but it can be made dangerous, right? And one person was arguing, well, not arguing, but was discussing with the priest saying, oh, as long as you know your limit and you're not getting drunk, you're fine. The priest's like, so how do you find out your limit? You have to test it. That means you have to pass the limit. So it can be very dangerous, right? So this is, especially in high school, this is where a lot of kids are unfortunately starting to test a lot of their limits. And then they find, oh, I can get away with this. Oh, I can do this. I can do that. Let's push it a step further, right? And again, little things lead to bigger things. A lot of the materialism, can start off with something small and lead to, I only value material goods, and that's the only highest value. Forget God, forget the church, forget anything else. I am happy when I have value. If I am making lots of money, I am, like the prodigal son. I have lots of money, people will hang out with me, but we also know that as soon as the money's gone, the friends are gone. So let's make sure I continue to have lots of money. Right? These are things that they will struggle with. And it starts off again with things that might not necessarily seem like, how did they get from here to here? But it's even the same thing like when we were talking about success. When I gave you guys a definition of success in the church, it's what? To be close with God. Obviously, a great goal would be I want to be like St. Paul, but how do you get from there to here, right? There's little baby steps. So it's the same thing with the vice versa for negative things or negative values or belief systems. It starts off little by little. So just before I jump to you guys for the last person, anyone online, do you guys have any comments about the last person? Anything at all?
I can say something. The last personality, you mean?
Oh, hello?
Yeah, you mean the last personality?
Yes, the last personality.
Yeah, it represents the humanism. The people who cares about feelings and warmth, and most probably he was living in a family who cares about each other, and they care about warmth and feelings. That's why he enjoys staying at house playing video games, and he cares about the value of friendship and the warmth of feelings between friends. Yeah, this is what I wanted to say.
Very good. So I actually really like that because I never necessarily mentioned anything about his family, but you would be right to say that they were very close as a family. Based on what you're reading on that, yes, absolutely, they were very close with their family, and that did help keep that person in the church more or less. Even though they had struggles and issues throughout high school, university, if it wasn't for that closeness with the parents, they were still able to have conversations, even when they were doubting, we'll say, they were still able to continue having some kind of connection. It's because of the values of their friendships with their families. You guys had some other comments I know you want to mention. For the last person.
For the last person, I think more of the video game gives them maybe they were not socially accepted early on, so video games give them the guts that surround them, give them like feeling of being part of a subgroup.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Also, most of the pop culture people think that others who share the same pop culture with them know them and love them. Why this is not true? Like they don't. Nobody knows anyone. Like they might play with someone online, but that doesn't make them friends. But in their mind, they think they are actually friends.
Absolutely.
So it gives them this social umbrella and acceptance. It's materialism and yeah.
No, that's very well put. That subculture really affected that person more than anything else, where it's like, I don't have very many friends. I do have my family, which I value, and I value that relationship. So we know that they do enjoy relationships. It's not, I want to be alone or I want to be introverted and that's it. But when they found that, as you said, it's like these people know me, so I can build a more close relationship with them because they already know me, because of my persona of I enjoy video games, I'm a gamer, right? So and that happens where I try to find people that are like me so that I can have that friendship and build a friendship, and we can talk about things and I feel like I'm building or I'm bonding with something. I remember when I was little, I found this very interesting. In high school, I never used to watch sports. I enjoyed playing sports, but I hated watching it. I remember every day in high school, in grade 9, my friends would just stand around in a circle when we first got into school, and before the bell rang and everything, and they'd start talking about sports, and this game happened and that, and I always felt so out of place. I'm just standing there like, okay, so when are we gonna switch topics? And it got me to the point where I'm like, I'm gonna start watching sports because I want to be involved. I want to try to feel like I'm a part of something bigger than myself, right? And I always find it very interesting because you find people who watch sports sometimes, they get so involved in that specific thing. They become fans, or the term fans comes from a fanatic, right? A sports fanatic. So I'm a basketball fan, or I'm a Raptors fan. I'm a fanatic. And that's a very extreme word when you think about it, right? It's very extreme. And it's true because you see these people that are sometimes very big fans. They dedicate so much of their life towards this one single item or one single sport. And you're thinking, like, this is all just material, or you're not even playing, you're not even making money off of this. Why are you so involved in this, right? But part of it is also, again, being accepted by others. Part of it is that culture where, as we mentioned, how we were talking about how basketball has been even ingrained in like pop culture, right? So we're seeing a lot more of people trying to find these subcultures to blend in. And we find that happening more and more often now because, again, it's scary how many different things are out there in the world. And so kids are still kids. They still are scared of things. And so they want to find comfort in something. When we were talking about the isms, you mentioned materialism. Is there any other ism that you could think of that could have also applied to this person? Hedonism? Yeah, hedonism was another one that could have applied. What else?
Humanism.
Humanism. I like humanism. So when we're talking about values and friendships and whatnot, they're trying to say that they're making the right decisions that are going to be morally accepted for themselves and for society. So they generally wouldn't do anything that can hurt people, right? They're looking at a very humanistic approach, and I want to be all about making the people around me happy. I'm not a confrontational person. So a very good point on the humanism. That could have also applied to that person. I think we're going to stop there because we're just a few minutes before 6 o'clock. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Come across scenarios where it's actually become integral because the parents are so protective.
Mhm.
And in this case, so very protective parents,
Mhm.
kid doesn't have a chance to interact with other people.
Yeah.
Find himself in video games.
Yeah.
He has a couple friends they can associate with. That's the only option they have. Very much associated with them. But that doesn't help them growing up. Like, would you,
Yeah.
like, from a Sunday school perspective, like, would that be something that you negotiate with the parents, or you say, because realistically,
Mhm.
chances are parents are to blame. I'm not sure if
No.
here, but things happen because of the parents.
So again, when we talk about the nature versus nurture, part of it is going to always be on the child. But I would say before we go not against, but we talk to the parents, let's make sure we've addressed every possible issue we can address with the child first, and talk to the parents about, do you have any concerns with your child? If they're saying, I'm happy with my child the way I am raising him, about, there's not much you can say or do there at that point, right? What you can do is just be there to support the child, be there to help them if they have any questions, if they have any fears, concerns, be that friend that they need, right? I was hearing, I forgot who was talking about, the servants meeting, they're talking about different age groups. So between 1 to 9, they're talking about boys specifically, but between the ages of 1 to 9, the boy is usually looking up to their dad. They want to be like their dad. But after 9, they're looking for a mentor. Usually they say it's a male mentor that they're looking for, that they want to emulate or look at. And they said there's a lot of good things that come out of this when they do find a mentor. And in the service meeting, they're saying that's what the Sunday school teacher is there for. It's like between 10 and past that, it's like you can be that mentor that they can look up to and build their personality a little bit more. So again, sometimes we might not be able to get involved with the parents, and obviously we pray about it. We ask our spiritual father of confessions, our spiritual fathers, see what their suggestion is, because they also might know something else that we don't know about the child, and then we go from there. But I would say before we approach a parent, it'd be a very much the last thing I would ever do. That makes sense.
Sure. Like, I was just asking,
Yeah, no, I'm saying, yeah.
if I'm a parent, I would love to see Sunday school teacher and talk to me about, if you see something like this. So
Mhm.
I fully understand why you're saying it's a last resort,
Mhm.
but, yeah, it sometimes seems like you want to hear from others,
Mhm.
and it's not necessarily like the constructive criticism is a good thing to have, right?
Absolutely.
But yeah, I understand the reservations.
But I will say this. Remember before, at least I remember with me during parent-teacher interviews, my parents would come in, it's what's wrong with my child?
Yeah.
Tell me. Now it's become very different where it's my child's perfect, right? Like tell me good things about my child. I don't want to hear bad things. So maybe for you as a parent, that's what you want to hear. And it's very interesting you mentioned that because even in my Sunday school service, I have certain parents that are like that, where it's like, tell me what my son is doing or tell me what my daughter is doing. I need to know so I can fix it at home and do this and this and that. And there's others that they don't want to hear it. It's I'm sending my child for you for that 1 hour and that's it. That's all you get him for. Like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, exactly.
I noticed that there are many parents now, they send their kids to Sunday school
Mhm.
as like a
Daycare.
non-paid
Unpaid daycare.
nursery.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Honestly, yes.
No, you're right. You're right. So it is unfortunate that some parents might do this, right? But this is what we're facing with right now. Not everyone is very focused on the church. Even the people within the church might not always be focused on the church. It's a type of community to some people, right? And there's nothing wrong with someone saying, I feel involved or feel the community within my church. But again, we're going back to what is our motivation for the church? It should be for, being closer with God. And so if I'm sending my child to Sunday school, it's hopefully that's what I'm aiming for, that they can get closer to God with that. And our job is not always to focus on the parents, it's to focus on the child and what we can affect. So if the parent is seeing us as a daycare, great, good for them. But while I'm a daycare, I want to make sure I have made the most effective change on the child so that when they come back to their parents, I really enjoyed Sunday school. Uncle Kiro did this and this and that, and it was so much fun, and I really enjoyed it. Right? And then maybe next time you call the parents and, I want to talk to, I'd like to say hi to the thing. They remember, my child really enjoyed him. Maybe I should be more involved. Right? It's very difficult, but you're right. You're absolutely right.
Because like when I look at on
Hmm?
or it's different personalities,
Okay.
okay? No matter how hard we try in 1 hour Sunday school sessions, they're not like really how far you can go, unless it's a partnership with the family.
Mhm. So you mentioned the 1 hour Sunday school. Have you heard of the story, but the 3 stories by Pope Shenouda? Have you heard of that? In one of his books, he talks about there's 3. They're called the 3 purposeful stories, and one of them is about the servant. And the servant, and again, you might have heard of the story already, but basically it starts off with the servant that's dozing off as he's writing something on his desk. He passes out and then he wakes up, he finds himself in heaven, and it's beautiful, and he can't help but even just glorify God with the angels. And then he goes and he sees this city of servants, right? And he sees like different saints that were there that were serving people, and then he starts seeing some of his Sunday school teachers. And so he's so excited, he's like, I want to go and see them and stand next to them. And as he's walking to it, a big angel comes and he's like, why are you trying to enter this? This is a city of servants. He's like, great, I'm a servant, I'm a Sunday school teacher. And the angel's like, no, you're not a Sunday school teacher. And he's like, no, you have to know me. Like, ask the people that are inside there. They know me. Like, they know me. I was serving with them. And they're like, we know who you are, but you are not a servant. Not in God's, I forgot the exact word, but he said, but like in his wisdom, you were never a servant. And then so he starts crying. He's upset. It's like, why am I not a servant? And I used to do this. I used to serve. I used to give wazas and this and this and that. And so the angel starts slowly coming up to him and saying, okay, let's not cry. We're in heaven. We're not a place for tears. But let's talk about what you did as a servant. And then he starts going into all of them. And it's like, you served for 1 hour on a Sunday or on a Friday. Whereas these servants, that was just a very small part of their service. Their phone calls, it was throughout the whole week. How often did they call their kids? How often did they do this? How often did they do that? And then he basically, lack of better words, he destroys that person destroys that image that he had of himself of being a servant to the end. Like he's saying, I was never a servant, you're right. to the angel. It's like I was never a servant, and I really do recommend if any of you get a chance to read it, or there's the app called Upper Room Media, if you've ever heard of it. It's actually an audio version of it is on there. The first time I read it, I remember just bawling my eyes out. I was like, I am not a servant. I am not a servant with this, and I need to do better. So it's something.
That emphasizes the point.
Mhm.
That story emphasizes the point. So a servant is not just in the Sunday school.
For 1 hour.
You need to do a lot more.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm saying. With this type of, so many factors, so many things influence,
Mhm.
you know, personality of a child.
Yes.
Unless you partnership with a family,
Mhm.
nothing. But I see this as very difficult mission to make any impact.
Mhm.
Because, you say, you need to call the child.
Yeah.
If the parents is not supporting the idea of you calling the
I
child,
see where you're going.
ah,
Okay.
You take the child out for let's
Ice
go
cream or
to,
something. McDonald's.
McDonald's together, or let's
Mhm.
go play soccer game.
Yeah.
Unless the family accepts it.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah,
Okay,
so-
I understand what you're saying. I think when I heard partnership, I understood it very differently from what you were trying to. But yes, that makes sense. You have to,
be accepted
you have
by
to
the
talk to the
family,
parents.
not
Yeah,
the child.
absolutely.
So, there's a lot simple problems.
Mhm.
And it's the only time you get, only time you have with a child.
1 hour.
1 hour for Sunday school, you have another 50 other children.
Mhm. It's very
Which
difficult.
I see you can very hardly make any impact.
No, and that's a very fair point. It's our. I remember something being said to me. I am the first and foremost. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not my job title. I am a servant of Christ. And if that's my main focus, that's my main job first, then I should prioritize my life around that. So it's serve and do what I can, because that's what my first role is. And then if I'm a pharmacist, that's my secondary job. And I have to look at it that way. So I agree with you 100%. We have to figure out ways to be better able to connect with these people. And it has to be outside of Sunday school as well. Thank you very much. Alrighty, guys. We'll see you guys not next week, the week after. Because next week is Thanksgiving. Alrighty.
I heard there will be a schedule posted somewhere.
All I know it's next week is Thanksgiving, but all the other weeks is regular.
Yeah, but actually, calendar.
Take care. Have a good night. Thank you, guys. Hopefully I'll see you the week after.